Good Lord, you saved her. Is she all right?
She's safe, just very frightened.
Footsteps echoed sharply against the cobblestones as a runaway carriage tore through Grosvenor Square. A desperate cry pierced the afternoon chill. Without a second thought, a young woman in a faded woolen coat hurled herself into the path of crushing iron, unknowingly rewriting the destiny of England's most guarded duke. London, in the late autumn of 1842, was a city of stark contrasts, where the gilded carriages of the aristocracy rolled past the soot-stained windows of the working class. Genevieve Croft belonged to neither world, suspended in the agonizing purgatory of the ruined gentry. Following the sudden death of her father, Viscount Croft, whose catastrophic investments in the East India Company had left them penniless, Genevieve had been stripped of her title, her home, and her future. Now, she survived by mending lace for a demanding modiste in Mayfair, navigating the sprawling, unforgiving streets with her head down and her pride tightly bound. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the fragile order of her existence shattered. Genevieve was crossing Grosvenor Square, clutching a parcel of delicate Chantilly lace, when a sudden, terrifying crack of a whip echoed through the dense fog. A team of massive black stallions, spooked by a bursting steam pipe from a nearby construction site, had snapped their reins. The heavy carriage they dragged careened wildly, tearing toward the pedestrian walkway. Panic erupted. Gentlemen scrambled over iron fences, and ladies shrieked, dropping their parasols. But Genevieve's breath hitched as she saw the true tragedy unfolding. Standing paralyzed in the center of the intersection was a little girl, no older than 5, wearing a velvet pelisse the color of midnight. The child had dropped a carved wooden horse and was reaching down for it, completely oblivious to the ton of crushing iron and hooves bearing down upon her. Nearby, a terrified nursemaid was frozen, her hands clapped over her mouth in a silent scream. There was no time for reason. Driven by an instinct that defied logic, Genevieve sprinted forward. She threw her weight against the child just as the lead stallion reared. The impact sent them both tumbling across the unforgiving cobblestones. The carriage wheels screeched past, missing Genevieve's skirt by mere inches. She wrapped her body around the little girl, absorbing the harsh impact of the street, sliding until they crashed into the stone base of a gas lamp. Pain flared hot and white through Genevieve's left shoulder, and a sharp sting dragged across her cheek. The square plunged into a chaotic cacophony of shouting men and whinnying horses as the carriage finally crashed into a brick wall down the street. Trembling, Genevieve pulled back to inspect the child. The little girl was sobbing hysterically, but miraculously, she was whole. A small scrape on her knee was the only visible injury.
"It is all right, little one,"
Genevieve whispered, her voice shaking as she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a simple lavender-scented handkerchief, the last possession she had from her mother, monogrammed with a subtle G. She quickly bound the child's knee with it. "Beatrice! Oh, merciful heavens, Beatrice!" the nursemaid cried, rushing forward and dropping to her knees, weeping as she snatched the child from Genevieve's arms.
"You must watch her more closely,"
Genevieve gasped, struggling to stand. Her shoulder throbbed with a sickening intensity, and she could feel the warm trickling of a cut on her forehead. Before the nursemaid could thank her, a thunderous voice sliced through the crowd. "Where is my daughter?" Genevieve looked up to see a man pushing through the throng with the ferocity of a tempest. He was devastatingly handsome, with raven dark hair and piercing storm-gray eyes, but his aristocratic face was currently twisted in pure terror. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat that bespoke immense wealth and power. Instinctive fear gripped Genevieve. In her disheveled, bleeding state, surrounded by the elite of Mayfair, she would be subjected to interrogations, perhaps accused of attempting to steal the child or seeking a reward. The pride of the Crofts, battered but not broken, demanded she not become a spectacle of charity. As the powerful man fell to his knees to embrace his crying daughter, Genevieve slipped quietly backward into the thickening fog, leaving the lace parcel behind and melting into the anonymous crowds of London. Akram Daniels, the 9th Duke of Westmoreland, held his daughter so tightly his hands shook. He had lost his wife to consumption 3 years prior, a tragedy that had turned his heart to ice and his demeanor to stone. Beatrice was the only crack in his armor, the sole reason he continued to navigate the suffocating responsibilities of his title. "Papa," Beatrice sobbed, clutching his lapels. The angel saved me." Akram looked up, his sharp eyes scanning the crowd. "Who? Where is the person who saved her?" he demanded of the weeping nursemaid.
I do not know, Your Grace."
The woman stammered. "A young woman. She was here a moment ago. She threw herself right under the hooves." Akram looked down at Beatrice's leg. Tied neatly around her scraped knee was a torn piece of lavender-scented linen. He untied it gently, tracing the small, elegant monogram G. He stood up, his jaw set, clutching the fabric. Whoever this woman was, she had given him back his life, and he would not rest until he found her. But Akram's time was not his own. As the Duke of Westmoreland, he carried the weight of hundreds of tenants, vast estates, and political alliances that shaped the very nation. That evening, in his cavernous study at his London townhouse, he was confronted by his closest adviser, Lord Thomas Ashford. "The girl is safe, Akram. Thank God for that," Thomas said, pouring 2 glasses of brandy. "But you cannot let this incident distract you from tomorrow's dinner. The Earl of Harrington expects you to formally ask for Lady Arabella's hand." Akram stared into the roaring fireplace, the lavender handkerchief resting on his mahogany desk. Lady Arabella Gordon was the quintessential future Duchess. She was breathtakingly beautiful, impeccably bred, and her father's influence in the House of Lords was the exact leverage Akram needed to push through his agricultural reforms. It was a perfect match on paper, cold, calculated, and entirely devoid of affection. "I have made my peace with the arrangement, Thomas," Akram said, his voice flat. "Arabella will be a suitable mother for Beatrice and a capable mistress of Oakhaven, but I want this woman found, the one who saved my daughter. Spare no expense. Hire Josiah Trent from Bow Street if you must. I owe her a debt I intend to pay." For 3 weeks, Josiah Trent, one of London's most ruthless investigators, scoured Mayfair and its surrounding slums. He found the abandoned parcel of Chantilly lace, traced it to the modiste, but Madame Dubois lied, claiming the lace was stolen, entirely dismissing the notion that her quiet seamstress could be involved. Genevieve, nursing a bruised rib and a heavily bandaged arm, had quit her position immediately. Terrified the Duke's men were looking to punish her for the ruin of his daughter's garments or some other aristocratic whim. Destitution loomed. With her meager savings exhausted, Genevieve applied to the St. Jude Agency for Domestic Placement, desperate for a live-in position away from the city. Her exceptional education, a remnant of her father's better days, secured her an immediate interview. "Your French is flawless, Miss Croft, and your understanding of history is admirable," the stern headmistress of the agency told her. "I have an urgent request from Berkshire. A wealthy household requires a temporary governess for a young girl who has become exceedingly withdrawn following a fright in London. The pay is extraordinary, but the master of the house is notoriously demanding. Are you prepared for such a challenge?" "I fear nothing, madam," Genevieve replied, a weary smile touching her lips. "I will take it." 2 days later, a carriage deposited Genevieve at the towering wrought-iron gates of Oakhaven, the ancestral seat of the Dukes of Westmoreland. She did not know the title of her employer until the formidable housekeeper, Mrs. Higgins, welcomed her in the grand foyer. "His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland, is currently away on business, but will return by week's end," Mrs. Higgins explained, leading Genevieve up a sweeping marble staircase. "You are here for Lady Beatrice. Since the accident in London, she refuses to leave the nursery. She cries out in the night. The previous governess lacked the patience required." Genevieve's blood ran cold. The Duke of Westmoreland, Lady Beatrice, the little girl in the velvet pelisse. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She had walked directly into the lion's den. If the Duke discovered she was the woman from the square, he might believe she had orchestrated this employment to extort money from him. She resolved to do her job quietly and leave before any suspicions could be raised. When Genevieve entered the sunlit nursery, she found a pale, quiet child sitting on a window seat, clutching a wooden horse. "Good morning, Lady Beatrice," Genevieve said softly. Beatrice turned. Her large gray eyes widened, mirroring her father's. She dropped the wooden horse, pointing a small, trembling finger at Genevieve. You are the angel. Genevieve rushed forward, dropping to her knees and taking the child's small hands. Listen to me, Beatrice. Yes, it is me, but this must be our secret. Do you understand? It is a special game. If anyone finds out, they might send me away, and I very much want to stay and be your teacher. Beatrice's face broke into a radiant smile, the first she had shown in weeks. A secret game? Just us? Just us, Genevieve promised, her heart aching at the child's desperate need for affection. Over the next week, the transformation in the nursery was miraculous. Genevieve did not force Beatrice into rigid lessons. Instead, she took her into the sprawling gardens, teaching her botany by the lake, and turning history into thrilling stories of knights and queens. The sound of Beatrice's laughter, absent from Oakhaven for years, began to echo through the long corridors. Akram returned on a rain-swept Friday evening. Exhausted from parliamentary debates and the suffocating presence of his impending fiancée Arabella, he went straight to his study. He poured a drink, his eyes immediately drawn to the framed portrait of Beatrice on his desk, and the lavender handkerchief resting beside it. Trent had failed. The savior was a ghost. "Your Grace," Mrs. Higgins said from the doorway, "I am pleased to report that the new governess, Miss Croft, has worked wonders. Lady Beatrice was even riding her pony today." Akram's brows furrowed. "Indeed? I should like to meet this miracle worker." He found them in the grand library. Genevieve was sitting on a Persian rug, an ancient map of the world spread out before her, while Beatrice eagerly pointed to continents. When Akram cleared his throat, Genevieve scrambled to her feet, smoothing her modest gray dress, her heart hammering wildly. "Papa!" Beatrice cheered, running to him. Akram scooped his daughter up, holding her tight, but his eyes were fixed on the governess. She was not what he expected. Instead of a dowdy, severe woman, she possessed a quiet, arresting beauty. Her auburn hair was pinned back neatly, but a few rebellious strands framed a face that held a startling intelligence and a chin tilted in subtle defiance. "Miss Croft," Akram said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that sent a strange shiver down Genevieve's spine. "I am in your debt. You have brought the light back to my daughter's eyes." "Lady Beatrice is a remarkable child, Your Grace," Genevieve replied, keeping her gaze carefully lowered to his ascot. She simply needed someone to listen. Akram noted the refined cadence of her speech, the proud set of her shoulders. "You speak like a woman accustomed to grander rooms than a nursery, Miss Croft. I speak like a woman who reads, 'Your Grace,' nothing more." A faint smile touched Akram's lips, a rare occurrence. "We shall see." The fragile peace of Oakhaven shattered 2 days later with the arrival of Lady Arabella Gordon. Accompanied by a retinue of servants and a mountain of trunks, Arabella swept into the estate like a conquering queen. She was breathtaking tall, with porcelain skin, golden hair, and a smile that never quite reached her calculating blue eyes. The engagement was to be officially announced at the upcoming autumn ball held at Oakhaven. From the moment she arrived, Arabella made her territory known. She was cloying and affectionate with Akram, yet dismissive and entirely indifferent to Beatrice. During an afternoon tea in the drawing room, Arabella noticed Beatrice clinging to Genevieve's skirt. "Honestly, Akram." Arabella sighed, waving a dismissive hand. "The child is far too attached to the help. When we are married, I shall send her to a proper boarding school in Switzerland. It builds character." Akram's jaw tightened. "Beatrice stays at Oakhaven, Arabella. That is non-negotiable." Arabella's eyes narrowed, shifting to Genevieve, who was biting her tongue so hard she tasted copper. In that brief exchange of glances, a silent, deadly war was declared. Arabella recognized something dangerous in the governess. She recognized that the Duke looked at Miss Croft with a profound, lingering respect he never afforded his future Duchess. As the autumn ball approached, Oakhaven was consumed by frantic preparations. The estate was transformed with garlands of autumn leaves, crystal chandeliers polished to blinding brilliance, and endless deliveries of fine silks and exotic foods. Yet, amidst the chaos, the emotional gravity of the house was quietly shifting. Akram found himself increasingly drawn to the nursery, making transparent excuses to observe Beatrice's lessons. He and Genevieve would engage in sharp, spirited debates over history and literature, their conversations crackling with an unspoken, magnetic tension. Genevieve challenged him. She did not flatter him or cower before his title. She saw the man beneath the dukedom, the grieving father desperate to protect his child. And Akram, in turn, found himself captivated by her resilience, her fierce intellect, and the gentle, maternal grace she bestowed upon Beatrice. Late one evening, just 3 days before the ball, Akram found Genevieve alone in the library, struggling to reach a heavy volume on the top shelf. Without a word, he stepped behind her, his chest brushing agonizingly close to her back. He reached up, his large hand easily retrieving the book. Genevieve froze, her breath catching in her throat as the scent of sandalwood and rain enveloped her. "You work too late, Miss Croft," Akram murmured, his voice low, vibrating in the quiet room. "The mind does not tire, Your Grace, even if the body does," she whispered, turning slowly. She was suddenly trapped between the towering bookshelves and the Duke. The dim candlelight flickered across his face, highlighting the intense, searching look in his gray eyes. Akram's gaze dropped to her lips, then moved to the faint, silvery scar on her forehead, a remnant of the carriage accident that had healed poorly. He gently raised a hand, his thumb brushing lightly against the scar. Genevieve gasped softly at the electric jolt of his touch. "How did you get this?" he asked softly. Panic flared in Genevieve's chest. "A fall, Your Grace. Long ago." Akram looked as though he wanted to press further, to close the minuscule distance between them. But the heavy footsteps of a servant echoing in the hall broke the spell. He stepped back abruptly, his mask of aristocratic indifference slamming back into place, though his eyes remained dark with conflicted desire. "Good night, Miss Croft." From the shadows of the hallway corridor, Arabella watched the exchange, her perfectly manicured hands curling into fists until her nails dug into her palms. The sheer intimacy of the moment she had just witnessed disgusted her. It was unacceptable. Akram was hers, not for love, but for power. A mere governess threatening her ascent to the highest echelons of society was a pestilence that needed to be eradicated immediately. The next morning, Arabella initiated her plan. She ordered her personal maid, Clara, a woman as ruthless as her mistress, to search Genevieve's quarters while the governess was out riding with Beatrice. Clara tore through Genevieve's modest belongings. Hidden beneath a stack of plain linen chemises, Clara found a small wooden box. Inside was a tarnished silver locket containing a miniature portrait of a viscount, a few dried wildflowers, and something else, a piece of torn, lavender-scented linen bearing the monogram G. When Clara presented the torn handkerchief to Arabella, the future Duchess stared at it, her mind racing. She knew the story of the carriage accident. Akram had spoken of nothing else for weeks, obsessing over the mysterious savior who had vanished. Arabella had even feigned sympathy, promising to help him find the woman. Arabella placed the torn fabric next to a matching piece Akram kept displayed on his study desk. They aligned perfectly. A cold, venomous smile spread across Arabella's face. The governess was the savior. If Akram discovered this, his gratitude would evolve into something unbreakable. He might even defy society and cancel the engagement. Arabella could not simply destroy the handkerchief. If the girl ever spoke up, Akram might believe her. No, Genevieve Croft had to be utterly ruined, disgraced so profoundly that even if she claimed to be the savior, Akram would view her as a manipulative liar. "Clara," Arabella said smoothly, walking over to her jewelry box. She pulled out the Gordon sapphire, a heavy, priceless brooch that had been in her family for 3 centuries. "Place this in the bottom of Miss Croft's trunk. Bury it deep." "Yes, my lady," Clara whispered, taking the jewels. The trap was set. That evening, Akram hosted an intimate dinner for the immediate family and a few high-ranking local magistrates, a prelude to the grand ball. Genevieve, having fed Beatrice in the nursery, was crossing the grand gallery to return a book when the double doors of the dining room flew open. Arabella emerged, her face a mask of performative distress, followed closely by a bewildered Akram and the murmuring magistrates. "I tell you, Akram, it is gone," Arabella cried, pressing a hand to her chest. "The Gordon sapphire, my mother's brooch. I left it on my dressing table not 3 hours ago." "Calm yourself," Arabella. A servant merely misplaced it, Akram said tightly, clearly irritated by the dramatic display in front of the magistrates. I assure you, they did not. I know exactly who took it, Arabella declared, her voice ringing through the hall. She turned her icy blue gaze directly onto Genevieve, who had frozen mid-step. It was her, the governess. Silence crashed over the gallery. Akram's expression darkened into thunder. Arabella, mind your accusations. Miss Croft is a gentlewoman of impeccable character. Is she? Arabella sneered. She is destitute, Akram, a desperate creature who wormed her way into your household. I saw her lingering near my chambers this afternoon. Search her room. If I am wrong, I will publicly apologize. But if I am right, she is a thief and a criminal. I have done no such thing, Your Grace. Genevieve stepped forward, her voice shaking with righteous indignation. She looked at Akram, pleading for him to see the truth. I have never entered Lady Arabella's chambers. Then you will not object to a search, Arabella challenged smoothly. Akram looked at Genevieve. He saw the fire in her eyes, the sheer impossibility of the accusation. I will not subject my staff to this humiliation without proof, Arabella. The proof is in her room. Your Grace, Clara piped up from the shadows. I saw her hide something in her trunk. Akram's jaw locked. The magistrates were watching closely. The law was the law, and a formal accusation of grand theft had been made in their presence. Mrs. Higgins, Akram commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. Search Miss Croft's quarters. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Genevieve stood perfectly still, her chin held high, though her heart felt as if it were being crushed in a vice. She looked at Akram, but he stared straight ahead, a statue of unyielding authority. When Mrs. Higgins returned, her face was ashen. In her trembling hands she held the glittering Gordon sapphire. It was buried beneath her linens. Your Grace, the housekeeper whispered. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Arabella smirked in triumph, quickly masking it with a look of betrayal. You see, Akram? A common thief in the nursery, left alone with your precious daughter. Genevieve's world spun. The trap was so flawlessly executed, so utterly devastating. No, she gasped, stepping toward Akram. Please, you must know I did not do this. It was planted. I am innocent. Akram stared at the sapphire, then at Genevieve, the woman who had sparked a fire in his deadened heart, the woman who had brought his daughter back to life. The evidence was damning, insurmountable in the eyes of the law and society. If he protected her, he risked a scandal that could destroy his family's reputation and alienate his political allies. Miss Croft, Akram said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room like a blade. Is there any explanation for how this came to be in your possession? Genevieve looked into his stormy eyes, realizing in that agonizing moment that no matter the connection they shared in the dark library, he was a duke and she was a nobody. The world of power would always protect its own. No explanation? Your Grace? Genevieve said, her voice breaking, tears finally spilling over her lashes. Because none of this is real. Akram closed his eyes, a muscle feathering in his jaw. When he opened them, the warmth was entirely gone, replaced by the ruthless Duke of Westmoreland. Pack your things, Miss Croft. You will leave Oakhaven tonight. Consider yourself fortunate. I do not hand you over to the magistrate. The night swallowed Genevieve whole. Cast out into the freezing Berkshire rain with nothing but a meager trunk and her shattered pride, she endured a brutal carriage ride back to the suffocating soot of London. With no references, and a brand of thievery unofficially attached to her name, she secured a wretched, drafty garret in the crumbling district of Cheapside. The cold seeped into her very bones, but it was nothing compared to the ice that had encased her heart the moment Akram turned his back on her. She had survived poverty before, but surviving the loss of the only man she had ever loved, a man she had no right to love, was an entirely different agony. Back at Oakhaven, the grandeur of the autumn ball was entirely lost on its host. The estate blazed with 1,000 beeswax candles, the orchestra played triumphant waltzes, and the finest champagne flowed into crystal flutes. The guest list was a staggering display of Akram's power. Even Prime Minister Sir Robert Peel and the venerable Duke of Wellington were in attendance. conferring in the smoking room about the fragile state of the Corn Laws. Yet, the Duke of Westmoreland moved through the glittering throng like a spectre. Akram's chest felt hollowed out. Every time he looked toward the grand staircase, he half expected to see Genevieve's fiery auburn hair and that quiet, challenging smile. Instead, he was greeted by the cloying presence of Lady Arabella, who clung to his arm with the triumphant grip of a hunter displaying a prize stag. Upstairs, the nursery was a tomb. Beatrice had refused to speak a single word since Genevieve's sudden departure. She had completely regressed, sitting rigidly in the corner of her room, clutching her wooden horse and staring blankly at the wall. The haunting silence of his daughter tore at Akram's conscience, a persistent gnawing reminder that in his rigid adherence to aristocratic order, he had betrayed the only two people who had brought warmth back to his desolate life. The turning point arrived not in the grand ballroom, but in the quiet, methodical hands of Mrs. Higgins. The fiercely loyal housekeeper had harbored her own suspicions regarding the missing sapphire. She had seen the way Clara, Arabella's maid, had hovered near the nursery corridor, and she knew the impeccable character of Miss Croft. While Arabella danced a quadrille with a young viscount, Mrs. Higgins took it upon herself to inspect the future Duchess's chambers under the guise of replenishing the coal fires. As Mrs. Higgins arranged the vanity, a heavy velvet jewelry box caught her eye. It was slightly ajar. Protruding from beneath a velvet partition was not a jewel, but a piece of torn, soiled linen. Frowning, Mrs. Higgins tugged it free. The scent of faded lavender immediately hit the air. It was a torn handkerchief, bearing an elegantly embroidered monogram. G. Mrs. Higgins gasped. She was one of the few servants who had seen the matching half of the handkerchief resting on the Duke's desk. She remembered the carriage accident. She remembered the mysterious savior. And suddenly, the puzzle pieces slammed together with terrifying clarity. Without hesitation, Mrs. Higgins marched past the bewildered footman, bypassing the ballroom entirely, and intercepted Akram as he stepped out onto the terrace for a moment of desperate solitude. "Your Grace," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice shaking but resolute. "I beg your forgiveness for this intrusion, but you must see this immediately." Akram turned, irritation flaring in his eyes, but it vanished the moment Mrs. Higgins pressed the torn fabric into his gloved hand. He stared at it. The lavender scent, the ragged edge, the letter G. "Where did you find this?" Akram demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, lethal whisper. "In Lady Arabella's jewelry box, Your Grace," the housekeeper replied firmly. "Miss Croft is innocent. She always was. I believe Lady Arabella discovered Miss Croft's true identity and framed her to eliminate the threat." The world seemed to stop spinning. Akram matched the ragged edge of the fabric in his mind to the piece locked in his desk. Genevieve Croft, the G, the fading silvery scar on her forehead that she claimed was from a fall, the way she had thrown herself in front of a runaway carriage without a second thought, and the way she had instantly bonded with a traumatized Beatrice. She was the savior. She was the angel of Grosvenor Square, and he had cast her out into the night as a common thief. A wave of absolute self-loathing crashed over him, swiftly followed by a blinding, apocalyptic rage. He had allowed his blind adherence to society's rules to blind him to the truth, staring him in the face. He had already fallen in love with Genevieve in the quiet sanctity of his library, entirely unaware that she was the very woman he had sworn to find and honor. He had chosen his true Duchess in his heart, only to let the venom of a manipulative aristocrat tear her away. Akram stormed back into the ballroom. The music seemed to fade into a distorted hum as he marched directly onto the dance floor, ignoring the shocked gasps of the ton. He seized Arabella's arm, pulling her away from her dancing partner with a force that made her cry out in alarm. "Akram! Whatever has gotten into you?" Arabella hissed, her porcelain mask slipping as the music ground to a halt. Hundreds of eyes, including those of Prime Minister Peel, locked onto the unfolding drama. Akram did not shout. He did not need to. His quiet, freezing fury carried across the silent room. He held up the torn piece of lavender linen for her to see. Arabella's face drained of all color. She stumbled backward, her breath hitching in genuine terror. "You planted the sapphire," Akram stated, his voice a blade of pure steel. You discovered she was the woman who saved my daughter's life, and you destroyed her because you feared my gratitude. Akram, please. You are making a scene, she whispered frantically, glancing at the stunned faces of her father and the surrounding nobility. She is a nobody, a penniless wretch. She is a woman of more honor and courage than you could ever hope to possess, Akram declared, his voice finally rising, echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The engagement is broken, Arabella. You and your retinue will vacate Oakhaven before dawn. If you ever come near my family again, I will ensure the entire House of Lords knows exactly what kind of viper the Gordon family breeds. Leaving Arabella weeping and humiliated on the dance floor, Akram turned his back on the aristocracy. The political alliances, the expectations, the rigid rules of the ton, none of it mattered. Only Genevieve. The London fog was thick and suffocating, choking the cobblestone streets in a blanket of gray. Genevieve pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders, carrying a small loaf of stale bread she had managed to purchase with her last few copper coins. The biting wind whipped through the narrow alleyways of Cheapside. Tomorrow, she would surrender herself to the harsh realities of the parish workhouse. Her spirit, once fiercely unyielding, had finally broken. She paused beneath a flickering gas lamp, coughing into her hand, the damp chill settling deep into her lungs. She closed her eyes, and unbidden, the image of Akram's face flashed in her mind, the stormy gray eyes, the rare, breathtaking smile he had given her in the library. She forced the memory away. It was poison. The sudden, thunderous clatter of hooves and carriage wheels shattered the miserable silence of the street. A magnificent jet-black carriage bearing the ducal crest of Westmoreland tore through the fog, skidding to a halt mere yards from where Genevieve stood. Genevieve froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The carriage door flew open before the footman could even reach it. Akram leapt out into the muddy street. He wore no overcoat, his formal evening cravat untied, his hair wildly tousled by the wind. He looked like a man who had ridden through hell itself. "Genevieve!" he shouted, his voice cracking with a desperate relief as his eyes locked onto her trembling form. She took a step back, her pride instinctively raising a shield. "Leave me be, Your Grace. Have you not taken enough? Have you come to see me dragged to Newgate yourself?" Akram closed the distance between them in 3 massive strides. He did not care about the mud soaking his expensive boots or the bewildered stares of the impoverished onlookers peering from their windows. He stopped just inches from her, reaching into his pocket. Slowly, his hands shaking, he held out a small, perfectly restored square of lavender-scented linen. The 2 torn halves had been meticulously pinned together, the monogram G whole once more. Genevieve stared at the handkerchief, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. The loaf of bread tumbled from her hands, rolling into the dirt. "I know," Akram whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I know everything, Genevieve. I know you saved my Beatrice, and I know Arabella framed you because she found this in your trunk, Mrs. Higgins discovered the stolen half in Arabella's chambers. Genevieve closed her eyes, a single tear cutting a warm path down her freezing cheek. "You did not believe me when it mattered. And it is a sin I will spend the rest of my life begging you to forgive," Akram said, his voice breaking. To the absolute shock of the Cheapside residents, the Duke of Westmoreland dropped to one knee in the freezing mud. He took her cold, gloveless hands in his large, warm ones, pressing them to his lips. "I was a blind, arrogant fool. I let the dictates of a society I despise dictate my actions. But you must understand, even before I knew you were the angel of the square, my heart had already made its choice." Genevieve opened her eyes, looking down at the powerful man kneeling in the filth before her. "I fell in love with a governess in my library," Akram confessed, looking up at her with naked, desperate adoration. "I fell in love with your fierce mind, your gentle soul, and the way you made me feel alive for the first time in years. I canceled the wedding, Genevieve. I severed the alliances. I do not want a political pawn. I want you, only you." The walls Genevieve had built around her shattered entirely. The profound sincerity in his eyes, the absolute vulnerability of a duke kneeling in a slum, washed away the bitter resentment she had harbored. She gently pulled her hands free, only to reach down and frame his face, her thumbs brushing away the rain that clung to his cheeks. "Akram," she whispered, using his given name for the very first time. He stood, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her fiercely against his chest. He kissed her, then a desperate, consuming kiss that tasted of rain, tears, and absolute salvation. The cold of the London streets vanished, replaced by the blazing heat of a love that had defied every odd, every societal law, and every wicked twist of fate. When they finally parted, breathless and clinging to one another, Akram rested his forehead against hers. "Come home, Genevieve. Beatrice is waiting, and so is your rightful place as the Duchess of Westmoreland." Genevieve smiled, the radiant, defiant smile that had captured his heart. "Then let us not keep them waiting, Your Grace." 3 months later, St. George's in Hanover Square witnessed a wedding that sent shockwaves through the aristocracy. Prime Minister Peel and the Duke of Wellington sat in the front pews, watching as the Duke of Westmoreland married a ruined Viscount's daughter. Genevieve wore a gown of exquisite white silk, adorned only with a delicate Chantilly lace veil and a simple lavender handkerchief tucked safely into her bodice. Beside them stood a beaming Beatrice, holding her new mother's hand tighter than ever before. Genevieve had saved the Duke's daughter without knowing whose life she spared, but in doing so, she had saved the Duke himself, cementing a legacy of love that would echo through the halls of Oakhaven for generations to come. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible journey of love, betrayal, and ultimate redemption. If this historical drama captured your heart, please smash that like button and share it with your fellow romance lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss another sweeping tale of passion and destiny. Tell us your favorite moment in the comments below, and we will see you in the next grand adventure.